Cover crops are grown not for harvest, but to improve or maintain soil fertility. A wide array of plant materials is available, along with a wealth of creative management options.
Cover crops can improve the soil by adding nitrogen and organic matter, reduce crusting or compaction, and thereby increase the infiltration of rain and irrigation water. They can also reduce erosion and the runoff or leaching of nitrate and other plant nutrients.
Other possible benefits include suppression of plant pathogens, nematodes, and weeds, and the provision of habitat for beneficial insects.
Because of the multiple benefits they can provide, cover crops play an important role in sustainable agriculture.
Let's explore the core concepts of cover cropping and develop some perspectives on creative management options for annual farming systems.
Cover crops have a rich heritage. Their earliest use occurred in ancient China and India. Fava beans were grown in rotation with wheat during early Roman times. In Northern Europe, lupins were used to improve sandy soils. North American farmers long used cover crops in rotation with vegetable and field crops and in the understories of orchards. Despite the long recognized value of cover crops, these important tools of sustainable agriculture fell into disuse with the advent of cheap synthetic nitrogen fertilizers during the late 1940s and early 1950s. Conventional agriculture came to rely more on synthetic pesticides and fertilizers and less on biological means of obtaining pest control and soil fertility. Cover cropping eventually became something of a relic, a practice pursued by organic farmers and a few others.
Nowadays, environmental concerns, declining oil reserves, and increasing cost of synthetic nitrate fertilizers have led to renewed interest in cover crops among farmers and researchers. But there are many questions about which plant species to grow and how to manage them to attain the most benefits. Cover crops can provide multiple benefits. When paired with symbiotic bacteria called rhizobia, many legumes can assimilate or fix atmospheric nitrogen, which later becomes available to cash crops. Non-leguminous plants can provide complementary functions and are especially useful at reducing leaching of nitrate and other nutrients from the upper soil layers, adding soil organic matter, reducing soil compaction, and suppressing weeds.
A cover crop tilled under before it matures is called green manure. Green manures are used to add nitrogen or organic matter to soils. If cover crops are mowed or clipped and the cuttings moved elsewhere before incorporating, they are termed green leaf manure because only the leaves and stems are tilled under. The cover crop may recover from the cutting and can later be cut again. Catch crops can reduce leaching of nutrients from the root zone or nutrient removal with surface runoff. In the cool season, grasses such as cereal rye or ryegrass can serve as catch crops, as can various mustards or phacelia. During the summer, Sudan grass can serve a similar function.
Smother crops are used to suppress weeds. Buckwheat has long been used as a smother crop. Living mulches are grown at the same time as economic crops to reduce soil erosion or compaction or suppress weeds. Artichoke, a perennial vegetable, can be grown amid a living mulch of perennial grass. The grass can be mowed or kept low by wheat or geese. Cover and economic crops may also be relay intercropped, meaning that their growth seasons overlap partially. For example, a cool season legume can be grown as a dying mulch for warm season vegetables, as shown here with bell pepper established over crimson or subterranean clover. Or clover, cowpea, or hyacinth bean can be overseeded into standing corn. If a cover crop is grown to provide habitat for beneficial insects, it is called an insectary crop. Now that we've learned some general terminology, let's learn some specifics about plant materials.
Most of the western United States receive little precipitation during the summer months. Therefore, cool season cover crops are favored because water is more available during winter. Promising cool season legumes include vetches, bell bean, and field peas. Purple, common, hairy, and Lana woolly pod vetches have proven useful as green manure. Vetches are often seeded with grasses, such as cereal rye or oats, to provide structural support for their viney growth. Vetches typically may require flail chopping prior to disking, otherwise they will entangle lightweight disc harrows. Unfortunately, flail chopping can be very destructive to lady beetles that build up in aphid-infested vetch stands. Use of sickle bar mowers can help to avoid this, but it is not always feasible.
Purple vetch has been used successfully in rotation with rice in the Sacramento Valley and can contribute 100 or more pounds of nitrogen per acre when plowed down as green manure. Under optimal conditions, it can produce as much as 300 pounds per acre. It is later maturing and more susceptible to freeze damage and drought than is Lana woollypod vetch. It does best on rich soils, but tolerates most soil types, including acid soils. Hairy vetch does well on a wide range of soils and is drought tolerant. Most forms show winter dormancy that protects plants from freeze damage, but decreases biomass production relative to purple and woollypod vetches. Woollypod vetch and hairy vetch are different forms of the same species. Woollypod vetch does not show winter dormancy and is less cold tolerant than hairy vetch, but more so than purple vetch. In trials at the University of California, Lana woollypod vetch produced more nitrogen than bell bean or purple vetch, leading to higher yields of sweet corn and tomatoes. Nitrogen production can be as high as 300 pounds per acre. Common vetch seed is less expensive than that of other vetches, but typically common vetch does not produce as much biomass or nitrogen, and it is susceptible to freeze damage. Common vetch has extrafloral nectaries that provide food to pest and beneficial insects alike. Common vetch comes in many forms and does well on a range of soil types.
Bell bean or faba bean, despite its erect growth, is a kind of vetch. It has long been used for soil improvement and can add nearly 200 pounds of nitrogen per acre. It is especially good on heavy soils. Bell bean is often infested with bean aphid, which attracts lady beetles, lacewings, and other beneficial insects. Like its close relative common vetch, bell bean has extrafloral nectaries used by beneficial parasitic wasps that attack pests of row and field crops. Faba bean is susceptible to frost damage, bean aphid, and to soil and foliar diseases, and does not do well on sandy or waterlogged soils. Field pea, sometimes called Austrian winter pea, is a viney plant that is fairly cold resistant but intolerant of drought. It grows well on a wide range of soils, including those that are acidic, but does not tolerate waterlogging or salinity. Nitrogen and biomass yields are typically not as great as those for the vetches or bell bean.
Warm season legumes may also be useful in rotation with cool season vegetables for suppressing weeds during breaks in cropping and for protecting and improving set-aside land. Cowpeas are drought tolerant, available in both vining and bush forms, and when plowed down can yield over 200 pounds per acre of nitrogen. In the Sacramento Valley of California, a crop of cowpeas planted to moisture requires only one additional irrigation to sustain its development. Hyacinth bean, Sesbania, and sun hemp are other drought-tolerant summer legumes that may prove useful, and which are currently being studied at the University of California.
Non-legumes can also be important as cover crops. Grasses are especially good at improving soil structure because their finely divided, fibrous roots stimulate soil microorganisms that in turn bind small soil particles into water-stable aggregates. Soils rich in such aggregates have better permeability and water-holding capacity and are less likely to erode. Grasses have higher ratios of carbon to nitrogen than do legumes and typically break down more slowly. Grasses turned under as green manure may be better at adding humic acids to soil, which help improve its nutrient-holding capacity. Cool season annual grasses that have proven useful in California annual farming systems include barley, oats, and cereal rye.
Black mustard and other plants in the same family have deep taproots that may enable them to break up compacted layers of soil, such as plowpan. Reduced compaction can mean improved growth by subsequent cash crops. However, scientific studies showed that mustard did not increase infiltration rate of irrigation water, whereas other non-leguminous cover crops did. Domestic buckwheat can be used as a smother crop because it grows rapidly and suppresses weeds. It is also believed to be good as a catch crop and has been shown to be very efficient at assimilating phosphorus. However, it contributes little biomass and its superficial root system renders it susceptible to drought, especially on sandy, well-drained soils. Buckwheat flowers about 30 days after sowing and is typically plowed down about 10 days into flower to prevent reseeding. Flowering buckwheat provides nectar to bees and various predatory and parasitic insects known to attack agricultural pests. But it also can harbor high densities of lygus bug and should therefore be used with care around susceptible crops. Now let's look at some practical management issues in cover cropping. As mentioned earlier, many legumes fix nitrogen when grown with symbiotic bacteria called rhizobia.
The rhizobia are housed in root nodules. The legume provides sugars and minerals to the rhizobia, which respond by helping the plant change atmospheric nitrogen to a form usable by the host plant. This is called nitrogen fixation. An essential link in this pathway is the chemical leg hemoglobin, produced by the plant. If the nodules appear pink inside, that indicates leg hemoglobin, and nitrogen fixation has almost certainly been occurring.
Amino acids produced by the rhizobia are converted to protein and other substances and stored by the plant. Leguminous crop residues are decomposed in the soil, and some of the nitrogen soon becomes available to succeeding crop plants. In order to ensure that the collaborative relationship is successful, legume seed should be inoculated with a proper rhizobia prior to sowing.
Just any rhizobial strain won't do, so make sure that the package of the strain sent to you specifically lists the cover crop for which you intend it. For example, most vetches and field pea require strain C, but bell bean takes strain Q. Cowpea takes EL, but sesbania takes special culture number 1 for sesbania. Bacteria for inoculant are cultured in the laboratory and sold in a carrier made of peat moss. The bacteria are delicate. It is important to keep the inoculant relatively cool and to avoid direct sunlight. Ultraviolet rays from sunlight will quickly kill the delicate bacteria. So will anti-microbial seed treatments. Expiration dates are usually stamped on the plastic bags, indicating the limits of viability. These dates should be carefully observed.
It is also important to use an adhesive nutrient gel as a sticker. Mix the nutrient gel with a little unchlorinated water until you get a tacky paste. Then add some of the inoculant and stir it in. Once the inoculant and the paste are thoroughly mixed, add water a little at a time to get a more dilute suspension.
Once the recommended amount of water has been added, pour just enough of the suspension over the seed to wet it. Then pour the remaining dry inoculant over the damp seed and mix thoroughly. The dry inoculant will absorb the excess moisture.
Now the seed is coated with delicate living bacteria. Once it has been allowed to dry in a cool, shady location, it will be ready to be sown. Avoid placing inoculated seed in sunlight or in hot or dry locations, because the rhizobia are easily killed. Also, avoid delays in sowing freshly inoculated seed. Do not delay planting of cover crops. The earlier in autumn you establish a cool season cover crop, the better stand you will get, and the fewer weeds. Seed beds are usually prepared by disking, although no-till drills can be used.
Seeding rates and specific methods for various cover crops are available through seed companies or in standard references like the UC Bulletin on Cover Crops. Seeding can be done using a grain drill for large-seeded cover crops or an alfalfa drill for smaller seeded varieties, or seed may be broadcast by hand, by a handheld seeder, or even by air.
If possible, broadcast seed should be covered by a subsequent light disking. But for small-seeded cover crops, such as clovers, medics, or mustards, a ring roller or cultipacker would be better. Higher seeding rates are needed if seed is not covered. As mentioned before, exposure to sunlight can kill rhizobia on inoculated seed, so early morning or late afternoon would be the best times of day to broadcast seed.
Leguminous cover crops usually do not benefit from nitrogen fertilizer because it can inhibit nitrogen fixation and promote weeds. On the other hand, added sulfur, potassium, or phosphorus can be useful in promoting legumes at the expense of their non-nitrogen fixing competitors. Irrigation may be necessary, especially in the early phases of crop establishment. Rains can be erratic, so do not rely on them entirely.
To till or not to till? That is the question.
In many farming systems, tillage is essential, in making a large proportion of the nitrogen contained in cover crops available to crop plants. Cover crop residues are typically incorporated using disc harrows or rototillers. But innovative tillage implements, such as power spaders, give thorough incorporation while reducing the threat of soil compaction.
Once cover crops are incorporated, the residues will be colonized by microbes. As the first flush of microbes subsides, nutrients become available to the following cash crop. Seed the cash crop about 1 week to 10 days after incorporation to allow cover crop residues to break down and nutrients to become available.
Conventional nitrogen fertilizer requirements of vegetable crops vary widely, from about 80 pounds per acre for broccoli to about 100 for asparagus, lettuce, or squash, to 180 for tomatoes, up to 280 for celery. Thus, the succeeding economic crop may in part dictate which cover crop to use. For example, Lana woolly pod vetch and purple vetch can contain as much as 300 pounds per acre of nitrogen and would be reasonable choices to precede celery. By contrast, under optimal conditions, field pea would contribute only about 200 pounds per acre. So supplemental nitrogen fertilizer would probably be required to make up the difference. On the other hand, field pea might do well preceding any of the other vegetable crops mentioned. Timing is important. For maximum short-term nitrogen availability, cover crops are typically disked at or near peak bloom.
Even if the proper cover crop is selected, the potential nitrogen yield may not be attained if conditions are not optimal. Cover crop growth and nitrogen production depend on weather, soil, and other environmental factors and may vary in time and space. Therefore, it is important for the farmer to estimate nitrogen content in order to determine how much supplemental nitrogen will have to be added for the subsequent cash crop.
To make this estimation easy, researchers have developed rules of thumb for figuring out nitrogen contribution based on the average fresh weight of a cover crop in pounds per 16 square feet, multiplied by a conversion factor. For example, purple and Lana woolly pod vetches both have fairly high nitrogen concentrations and require the conversion factor 16. So, if a crop of purple vetch gives an average weight per 16 square feet of 12 pounds, we multiply this by 16 and obtain an estimated nitrogen yield of 192 pounds per acre.
As suggested earlier, not all nitrogen is available immediately. It is gradually released during decomposition of the cover crop residue. If cover crops are allowed to mature fully, some of the nitrogen may be tied up in seed and be relatively unavailable to the succeeding economic crop. For mature annual legumes, the percentage of nitrogen tied up in seed may range from about 20% in Lana vetch to 90% for white lupin. The organic matter contributed by a mature cover crop will not break down as rapidly because it has a greater amount of lignin and a higher ratio of carbon to nitrogen.
Cover crops left to mature or retained as dead mulches may provide important habitat for beneficial insects, mites, and spiders. If a leguminous cover crop is left on the surface of the soil, 1/3 or more of the nitrogen it contains may volatilize as ammonia and be unavailable to subsequent crops.
On the other hand, reduced tillage techniques may leave a protective cover crop residue on the soil surface, reducing moisture loss and erosion. Mulches can also lead to enhanced densities of earthworms. Earthworms are particularly valuable in cycling nutrients and at promoting good soil structure and permeability. No-till approaches have received little attention in California vegetable crops, but there is increasing interest in this general approach. In the Midwest and the Southeast, there are reduced tillage techniques that do not rely on herbicides, but rather on mowing. Leaving remnant untilled strips of cover crops may be a strategy for maintaining habitat for beneficial predators and parasites amid annual crops.
Cover crops do not actually add nutrients other than nitrogen to the soil, but they can improve the availability of nutrients. This can occur by several processes. Breakdown of cover crop residues can lead to formation of humus, which enables the soil to retain nutrients in forms resistant to leaching, yet available for uptake by plants.
Certain cover crops are called dynamic accumulators because they make nutrients more available to other plants.
Deep-rooted cover crops can mine nutrients from deep soil strata and store them in above-ground parts. Upon incorporation and decomposition of such cover crops, these nutrients become available to shallow-rooted cash crops that follow. By this process, hairy vetch has been shown to improve the phosphorus availability in sandy soils.
Roots of cover crops may produce substances that improve nutrient availability to associated cash crops. White lupin roots produce citric acid, whereas rapeseed roots produce both citric and malic acid near the root tips, dissolving rock phosphate and improving phosphorus availability.
Buckwheat roots, on the other hand, do not acidify the soil much, but release enzymes that improve the availability of phosphorus and manganese. Buckwheat roots are also finely divided, presenting a great surface area and show a high capacity for accumulating phosphorus.
As with nitrogen-fixing plants, dynamic accumulators of other nutrients function most efficiently when the relevant soil nutrients are in short supply. It is still not clear what contribution such plants can make in California.
However, they may prove to be important in reclaiming lands that are heavily eroded or otherwise damaged. We have much to learn about the possible roles of cover crops in annual farming systems. Growing cover crops requires money, water, time, and care, and therefore may not suit all production schemes. In most cases, when a cover crop is growing, a cash crop is not. This can represent an opportunity cost to the farmer, and these costs must figure on the balance sheet.
We have seen that properly selected and managed cover crops can add nitrogen to the soil or add soil organic matter while improving soil structure and texture and relieve soil compaction.
Cover crops can also retard the leaching or runoff of soil nutrients and have been shown under some conditions to reduce plant pathogens, nematodes, and weeds, and to harbor beneficial insects.
But before you go out and plant a field of vetch or clover, you'll need more detailed information. We suggest that you consult books, bulletins, and manuals produced by the land-grant universities and the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Your local farm advisor and district conservationist of the Soil Conservation Service can provide you with particulars about cover crops best suited to your area and how to manage them.
The University of California Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education Program has developed a cover crop database which will be updated periodically to reflect advances in the field.
This information can be used by growers and researchers alike in developing creative use of cover crops in the western United States.